Welcome to Engage, a Genetec podcast.
The primitive forms of artificial intelligence we already have proved very useful. But I think the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. Humans, who are limited by slow biological evolution, couldn't compete and would be superseded.
When talking about artificial intelligence or machine learning, the concerns of many are summed up in that famous quote from Professor Stephen Hawking in his BBC interview from 2014. Professor Hawking, along with so many other leading tech giants, scientists, and economists, have questioned the universal consequences of AI's impact.
Thankfully, Professor Hawking's prognostications about AI overthrowing the human race have not come to pass. But there's no doubt that the adoption of AI in our everyday is transforming our world. And that's what we're going to get into today. I'm Kelly Lawitz.
And I'm David Chauvin. The most tangible application for AI and automation exists in the workforce, where advancements leave many worried for their jobs.
But just how disruptive will the move to AI and automated work be for physical security? Could it help operators become more efficient when dealing with the deluge of data? We speak with two leaders in intelligent automation to understand what's required, what's real, and what's at stake when it comes to deploying this technology.
I run a project called Managing the Future of Work, where we look at various elements of the developments in the workforce and the implications for policymakers and executives.
That's my guest, Joseph Fuller, professor of management practice at Harvard Business School. His decades as a consultant for Monitor Deloitte has brought him to the forefront of the development of strategies, the application of technology, and data recruitment and workforce optimization. I speak with Professor Fuller in the first half of our show.
Followed by my interview with Florian Matusek, Product Group Director of Video Analytics at Genetec, Inc. A leading technologist in intelligent automation, we speak with Florian to understand what's required, what's real, and what's at stake when it comes to deploying this technology.
But first, I talked to Professor Fuller, whose work as the co-leader of Harvard's Managing the Future of Work initiative speaks to the realities of AI, automation development, and its impact on the workforce. I started our conversation by asking him where he thinks automation and AI will have the most influence in the years to come.
And so for you, what are some of these new categories or these new industries that maybe not, in the mainstream conversation yet, but where you see automation becoming bigger, where we thought, those industries might have been immune just a few years ago?
If you think of automation very broadly, encompassing things like the development of artificial intelligence, as well as physical automation like sensor networks and robotization, Internet of Things, I think we're going to see displacement of a type of talent that hasn't generally been affected by automation before. Specifically, workers that do non-routine cognitive work. What do I mean by that? Cognitive is pretty straightforward, obviously. It's more strong mind, good logic, and good numeracy and communication skills as opposed to a strong back. But non-routine work is work in which the variability around what we'll call the main sequence task is pretty great. There are 8, 10, 12 types of skills and types of tasks you might be called upon in a rather unpredictable fashion at any time during the workday. The vast majority of work historically has been actually routine work where that variability is rather narrow and therefore has been prime target for automation. If you go into an auto assembly plant today, it's much more manpower, a little bit less manpower intensive rather than it was historically. And if I can do the dirty, dark, dangerous jobs in an auto plant like spray painting cars or things that are otherwise subject to being fully automated with today's technology, so it's not a big risk to deploy it. I'll do so. What AI starts to do is cut into big chunks of what those non-routine white-collar cognitive workers have done. So whether it's a job like actuary or attorney or supply chain manager, while there's a veneer of uniqueness about each transaction that they do, a tremendous amount of what they do is actually can be isolated by AI and done by AI with a lower error rate than the humans make.
So the core is repetitive enough where it can be automated.
Well, also you're getting now to the next generation, what's often called in the literature of cognitive AI, where it doesn't rely on structured learning to understand its task. And so we're getting more and more sophisticated about how AI can learn either in unstructured fashion or through interfaces with that white-collar worker where the AI generates recommendations and the worker accepts it or not. And when you get to n equals a few hundred of those types of transactions, the AI has learned the parameters that govern the heuristics the human worker is applying to those decisions. And yes, it will still make the occasional error, which points out, I think, a pretty important thing, David, relative to the history of technology and where we will go. The deployment of technology has invariably displaced jobs while creating new jobs to support the technology. So the net attrition of work has not been 100%, not nearly. It's often been 50%, 60%. Now, the skills required to get the most out of that technology are often different than the skills the incumbent worker had, which gets us to all sorts of interesting questions about things like reskilling.
In today's society, short-term value creation, if I could use that word, is the primary driving factor for most decisions especially in publicly traded companies, right? It's all about short-term value creation, whether it's maximizing profit or top line, but it's all about short-term value creation. And if that's what drives the decisions of executives, of owners, investors, how can we expect that these decision makers will actually make decisions that will benefit society long-term versus using that technology to simply extract more short-term value that will result in, their personal benefits?
I think if I may, not to get too philosophical with you, but I think, an examination of cognitive psychology will show that human beings make short-term optimization decisions, not just business people. I'm also going to push back a little bit on the concept that technology is the adoption of it is going to kind of disproportionately be a negative thing for workers. So the first thing technology does, and has done to a great degree in sectors like mining and types of manufacturing, dirty, dark, dangerous jobs get displaced because of things like liability and also just general human decency, trying to prevent people from being in dangerous positions. The biggest category of work that's going to be automated way is the fourth D, and that D is dull. Your job, which is deadly dull right now, and may just be the way you pay your bills, may get much more interesting because you're able to spend hours on the more value-added part of it, or maybe you can go on and do something else.
Oh, that was a fantastic conversation. Thank you very much, Professor Fuller. I appreciate your time.
David, my pleasure to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Connected to privacy, we also have this topic about artificial intelligence, AI, or we call it intelligent automation. I'm also thinking about the Artificial Intelligence Act by the European Commission that was just released in April, where they are preparing rules at how AI is supposed to be used and where it's supposed to be used. This is also being tackled more and more on the regulatory side.
And that's my guest, Florian Matusek, Group Director of Video Analytics at Genetec. He received his PhD in Information Processing Science and is the co-founder of Kiwi Security, a leading developer of video analytics and video control solutions. An intelligent automation expert, Florian's work in video analytic technology for Kiwi Vision Privacy Protector was awarded the European Privacy Seal, Europrize. In the second half of the show, I talked to Florian about the real-world application of intelligent automation. We dive deep into what current advancements mean for workers in endangered sectors and the impact of data collection on bias. We kick things off by talking about the positives of automation and the evolution of the workforce in the wake of all these technological developments. There's a lot of hype and fear about AI and how it's going to replace jobs historically done by humans. What I want to know are the real-life applications of this technology. What does it look like in the workplace?
So AI is really great to automate things that are routine, so things that are repeating all the time. This is where we can really teach a machine to do stuff. So everything that's routine, for example, watching the video screens of an operator, this is where we can help them and filter out interesting information for the operator. So the operator himself or herself can actually make the actual decision based on the data, and we take away the task of watching the video. So this is a very good example where we can help operators with routine tasks. And at the same time, AI is producing also new kinds of jobs. For example, in Montreal, we have a dedicated team in our AutoView group of labelers. And those are people that are creating data sets. They are watching the videos and creating data sets for our license plate recognition. And it's a completely new type of job that, in fact, in Africa already takes a huge part of the economy. It's just labeling for AI, for Google, for Microsoft, for Amazon. And this wasn't there before. And I find it interesting because we always talk about new types of jobs in terms of very highly qualified jobs in terms of AI, which are produced as well. But we also create a lot of low qualified jobs for people who might not get a job because they're replaced, so to say, by AI.
Is it everything we predicted? And should we all be scared for our jobs?
So one of the things I think that we're seeing is something that's always happening with a hype, where at the beginning everybody's super excited and is expecting that the trend is continuing the same way as it started. And we're seeing now with AI that this is not the case as always, and we're reaching a certain plateau where things are not getting more accurate and more accurate and more accurate, but we actually find ways on how we can leverage this technology in real life beyond the hype. And I believe there are a lot of applications where it can make the life of our operators in the security industry more efficient, the lives to make it more easy to automate things. But we have to be realistic what works and what doesn't work. And I think this is a very important point for all end users, all our partners to really understand the technology and see where it can help and where it cannot help, right? What we have seen last year with the pandemic is that there were a bunch of applications that were based on AI that can really help in our day-to-day operations. And I divide them into three different levels, so to say. The ones that really help and automate things and help our operators, the ones that somehow help but still need some kind of engagement by users. And the third category are ones that were just overhyped and in the end didn't turn out to be any useful applications. To the first category, I would count things that help you manage occupancy, right? In the pandemic, it was very important to know how many people are in a certain area, how many people go in a shop. So you could, for example, turn on the red light if there are too many people in an area. So using video analytics, people counting for this makes a lot of sense. In the second category, I would see things like social distancing, where AI was being used to detect how close people are walking to each other. This is useful, but if you go to practice and actually talk to operators, it's not so useful anymore to do it completely automatically, because in the end, the AI doesn't know who belongs together and who doesn't belong together and who is allowed to walk together and who is not. And I had an interesting conversation with a professor from Amsterdam, a criminologist that works with the police of Amsterdam to analyze the output of AI with criminologist and anthropologist methods to figure out who belongs together and who doesn't. And it's a very nice example where you combine AI with humans to drive value for the businesses and for police in this case. And then there's a third category of AI applications that boiled up during the pandemic that didn't really make any sense. And I would count there all this thermal cameras to temperature checking and so on. This turned out to be a big hype that was more dangerous than useful.
And what role do you see AI playing in alleviating burnout?
So burnout with operators is a big problem. There was recently a study that 70% of operators are suffering from burnout. And it's no wonder, because we install new sensors, new types of information systems. We have video analytics that is analyzing data. But the result of this is that there is so much data coming towards the operator all the time. They all the time get flashing lights and alarms and so on. And it creates an anxiety that is just not healthy in the long term and creates burnout. So when we introduce new systems, new AI systems, we shouldn't only think about what they can detect on a technical level, but we also need to think about how this information can be consumed. Do we have systems in place that manage this data, that prepare it for the operator, that filter through and also only provide the interesting stuff? Do we have dashboards? So we need to think about both things, creating the data, but also managing the data so we don't overload our operators.
The last couple of years, I'd say especially during the pandemic, there's a lot more awareness and discussion around systemic bias and racism in our culture. And how technology created, statistically speaking, by white men can reflect that bias. What is the responsibility of businesses and end users to verify the suitability of the data sets used in their applications?
So the first thing is to realize that there can be bias, and there likely is always some kind of bias, because machine learning is based on data and data sets, and these data sets are based on real decisions of humans, and all humans are biased in some kind of way. So I think there is no way to completely avoid bias, but what's important is to realize that there is bias. Because once you realize that there is bias, there are ways to counteract it and do something against it. And I believe that there is definitely a point that end users and users in general of machine learning systems have a certain responsibility to ask, what are the biases? Are the biases in there? And what are the data sets that were used to train these AI systems? And this is not being done today for several reasons. One of them is that there is not enough awareness of this bias problem. Today, we're all about, let's make this next thing work. It's all about features and cool stuff. But we have to calm down a little bit and think about these things that are happening in the background and build this awareness that there is bias. So I think that's one problem. The other one is that from the manufacturing side, there is no way today or no sense there to provide this information, what kind of data sets are in there. I've been talking personally to many manufacturers, and it's one of my standard questions to any video analytics company that I talk to is, what are your data sets? Where do you get your data sets from? Do you produce them yourself? Do you buy them? Are they public ones? Because there are also licensing issues. And this is very confidential data for many manufacturers. So I think this is also one reason why this is not being talked about today. But it's definitely something that needs to change in the future. Manufacturers need to be much more open about their data sets, much more open what they do to balance their data sets, how they try to avoid biases or fight against certain biases, and also on the end user sides to demand it. Because if there's no demand to manufacturers, the manufacturers will also see no reason why they should do it. So definitely responsibility on both sides.
So, but how do we push that forward, right? So when we wanted privacy, that really started to be implemented when we had the force of law and regulations behind privacy. There are consequences. How do we do the same around, I guess, transparency and accountability around the data sets that we're using?
So with privacy, it started a few years ago with GDPR in Europe. That was essentially the blueprint for many other governments, the CCPA in California and also Brazil and Singapore and so on. But it was an initiative by the European Union that was really spearheading this. And similarly, they're doing something right now with AI as well. In April, the European Union proposed a new regulation for artificial intelligence that really targets how artificial intelligence is supposed to be used. So this is targeting the application side. And at the same time, there's a separate track dealing with the concept of so-called trustworthy AI. And this is a concept it's fairly new, and not many manufacturers have embraced it yet, but they will. And essentially, it means that in order to have an AI that's trustworthy, it needs to fulfill certain principles. One of them is avoid biases. Another one is always keep the human in the loop. Do not make automatic decisions. Provide transparency. All these different kinds of concepts, they are out there. There are working groups in the European Union that are working on this. This is published. The Mozilla Foundation is a very good example that really is embracing this with everything they do, of course, with the Mozilla browser. And other companies are jumping on this. So trustworthy AI is a topic of the future that's really just starting right now, but it will be at the core of any AI application that we build in the future. I'm sure of it, and there will be regulation around it as well. I'm sure maybe you have heard of it, about this article in The Guardian from Kate Crawford from Microsoft. She was saying our AI is not artificial intelligence. Very nice line. Anyway, but her point is that AI is everywhere, but it includes so much more than really AI. It's all the processes when you order toilet paper from Amazon. Yep. It's not only recognizing your voice, it's triggering so many things around it that AI is something different today than it was 5 years ago.
And so what's the talk at Genetec?
So we actually have embraced it without knowing it before, because for example, in my team, we develop video analytics applications. We have one guy who is dedicated about working with the data sets and balancing the data sets. So what he's doing is he's looking at our data sets and seeing how many men, how many women do we have in our data set, how many different ethnicities and so on, to make sure that it's as balanced as possible. Of course, to avoid biases, but also just to make a good product, right? If we sell our product in Brazil, we want to make it work the same way as in Norway. So it's really in our interest to make it as balanced as possible, to make it as general as possible.
When we look at these data sets, there are two different kinds we see on the market: the academic, theoretical applications in universities, and the real-world practical applications in business. Is there a way to foster a better relationship between these two applications to produce better, more accurate data sets?
Yes, I absolutely agree. If we look at data sets, there are two big problems, really. On the academic side, you have the big problem of the lack of real-world data. So you see a lot of simulated data. You see academics running in the courtyard trying to create data sets. I know it from myself. We created a data set for fight detection and we simulated fights, but it turns out the simulated fight is not the same thing as a real deal. So there's definitely a lack there of proper data sets on the academic side. On the company side, there's a lack of data sets that are allowed to be used commercially, because there's a lot out there on the academic side, but from a licensing perspective, companies are not allowed to use it. Some do it anyway, which actually is a legal risk also for the users of these systems, because there's a licensing issue there. But the companies that do not use these data sets, they are very limited and have to build up themselves. And in the end, it's big companies that have the resources to create big data sets that can build proper AI applications. And all these smaller ones are either left with bad data sets or being forced to use data sets that they're not allowed to use. So by helping this collaboration between academia and companies, I think we can solve both problems. Companies can provide data sets to academia that are from the real world. And at the same time, in this process, we could find a way to make these data sets publicly available under a licensing scheme that helps also small companies to create proper AI applications on real world data without having to rely on unlicensed stuff, essentially.
And working with those universities, could we also develop those standards for testing and certifying the quality and validity of those data sets?
Yes, I think this is a topic as well where actually we need academia, because there are many interesting approaches in academia to do this. On the other hand, we also have to realize that it depends a lot on the kind of data set that you're using. Right. Also, biases are very different depending on what you actually do with the data set and what it contains. For example, videos are completely different to transactional data in an ERP system, for example, where you have maybe names tied to it, while in the video you don't have it, but you see the images of people. So this is very domain specific. But I do believe there need to be rules to verify this. And actually also there is a framework to automatically or to semi-automatically do this, also coming from Europe. It's called Altai, ALTAI, that is implementing these trustworthy AI principles into an automatic checklist, so to say. So you can run your application through this checklist and basically get an assessment. How trustworthy is your AI?
Thank you so much, Florian, for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time. Take care. And that was Florian Matusek, Group Product Director of Video Analytics at Genetec, Inc. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Engage on machine learning and AI in the job market. I'm Kelly Lawitz. We'll see you next time.
Engage, a Genetec podcast, is a production of Genetec Incorporated. The views expressed by the guests are not necessarily those of Genetec, its partners, or customers. For more episodes, visit our website at www.genetec.com, on your favorite podcasting app, or ask your smart speaker to play Engage, a Genetec podcast.